Jimmy Haslam didn't just draft a quarterback. He didn't just place a bet on arm strength, footwork, or Sunday box scores. From the very beginning, this move was bigger, quieter, and way more disruptive than anyone wanted to admit. What Cleveland did was back a business before the rest of the league even realized a new market was forming. And instead of treating Shedeur Sanders like a prospect who needed to be managed, contained, and molded, they treated him like a long-term partner with leverage, vision, and something the NFL rarely plans for: independence. That single decision immediately broke the league's unspoken rules. While most teams hide rookies behind media restrictions and tightly scripted messaging, Cleveland amplified Sanders' voice. They didn't slow him down, they leaned into him. And almost overnight, the results started showing up in places the NFL has spent decades failing to penetrate. Jerseys moving outside the US, fans forming around a player instead of a logo, and a global audience paying attention to the Cleveland Browns for reasons that had nothing to do with their win-loss record. That's when executives stopped calling this interesting and started calling it a problem. Because this wasn't hype, it wasn't luck, and it definitely wasn't accidental. What you're watching right now isn't just a rookie quarterback story, it's a power shift happening in real time, and the league is realizing, maybe a little too late, that control doesn't live where it used to. From the outside, it looked like a routine draft decision. A franchise in need of stability, a quarterback with upside, a familiar story the NFL has told 100 times before. But inside Cleveland, this pick was never framed as a football move alone. From day one, Jimmy Haslam wasn't talking about development timelines or easing a rookie into the system. He was talking about scale, longevity, reach, things that don't usually come up in draft rooms. That's because Shedeur Sanders didn't arrive as a blank slate. He walked in with leverage most rookies never have: a built-in audience, media fluency, business instincts shaped long before his name was ever called. Other teams saw a quarterback who needed polishing. Cleveland saw an ecosystem already forming around him, and instead of trying to shrink that ecosystem to fit the NFL's comfort zone, they widened the lane. This is where the draft night narrative starts to fall apart. While other rookies were slotted into rigid development pipelines, say less, post less, let us handle the messaging, Sanders was treated like a strategic asset with agency, not a product to be controlled, not a pawn to be positioned, a partner. And that distinction matters more than people realize because it changes every downstream decision, from branding to media to how a franchise views its own identity. Cleveland didn't ask how quickly Sanders could adapt to the league, they asked how the league would adapt to Sanders. That's a fundamentally different question, and it explains everything that followed. Because once that mindset was locked in, this draft pick stopped being about the future of one position and became about the future of how value is created inside a modern sports franchise. And at the time, almost no one noticed. That was the mistake. What happened next caught the league off guard because it didn't follow the usual timeline. There was no waiting period, no slow build. Almost immediately, the momentum shifted in ways that didn't match what was happening on the field yet. Reports started circulating internally that Shedeur Sanders' merchandise was moving at a pace normally reserved for established superstars, not rookies still proving themselves. And this wasn't just domestic demand. The buzz was coming from places the NFL has historically struggled to reach at all. According to industry chatter and retail tracking seen by executives, Sanders' jerseys started showing up in international markets that barely acknowledged the league's existence: Europe, parts of Africa, the Middle East, regions where the Cleveland Browns logo once meant nothing. That's when the panic quietly set in. Because this wasn't Cleveland winning hearts through championships or dynasties. This was a player exporting relevance on his own terms. What made this even more unsettling for the league is how little forcing was required. There was no global marketing blitz, no artificial viral campaign. Sanders didn't need the NFL machine to create demand. He was the machine. His interviews traveled, his posture traveled, his message resonated beyond football, especially with younger and international audiences who don't separate sports from culture. They follow people, not institutions, and Sanders understood that instinctively. Behind the scenes, this wasn't being celebrated everywhere. Some teams viewed it as a warning sign. If one rookie could generate that kind of pull without league orchestration, what did that say about how much value had been suppressed for years? And more importantly, what happens when more players figure out how to do this? Because this was no longer about jersey sales or social metrics, it was about control slipping in plain sight. This is where the anxiety really sets in for the league's old guard, because what Cleveland unlocked isn't flashy or reckless, it's controlled, intentional, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. The traditional NFL power structure is built on management, hierarchy, and message discipline. Players perform, front offices decide, and the league shapes the narrative. That system works best when athletes are interchangeable, quiet, predictable. What Shedeur Sanders represents breaks that entire equation without ever raising his voice. What terrifies longtime executives isn't that Sanders has a platform. Plenty of players have that. It's that he doesn't need permission to use it, and more importantly, he knows exactly what he's doing with it. He doesn't rant, he doesn't freelancing headlines, he doesn't burn brand equity for short-term attention. Every appearance feels measured, every quote feels deliberate. That level of awareness is rare, especially this early, and it removes one of the league's most reliable control mechanisms, chaos. There's nothing to clamp down on. For decades, the National Football Leagues thrived by centralizing power. Media access was filtered, personal branding was tolerated, not embraced. Rookies, especially quarterbacks, were expected to keep their heads down and wait their turn. Sanders skipped that entire phase without breaking any rules, and that's what makes him so destabilizing. The system can't discipline someone who's succeeding without being reckless. And here's the part that keeps owners up at night. If one player can arrive this prepared, this composed, and this influential, what happens when more do the same? What happens when rookies start showing up with their own audiences, their own leverage, their own understanding of how value actually moves in a digital world? The league can't find that. It can't suppress it. All it can do is react. That's why the fear isn't loud, it's subtle. It shows up in closed-door meetings, in quiet strategy shifts, in executives suddenly talking about player partnerships and authentic storytelling, because everyone sees the same thing now. This isn't about a single quarterback being confident, it's about a structure that only works when players don't realize how much power they actually have. Behind the scenes, this is where the story stops looking like football and starts looking like a startup. What Shedeur Sanders brought into the building didn't resemble a typical rookie entourage. There were no random hangers-on, no chaotic social media energy, no reckless brand chasing. Instead, there was structure, intent, a quiet but serious operation that looked far closer to a founder assembling an early leadership team than an athlete just trying to survive his first season. Sanders operates with the mentality of someone who understands that attention is an asset, not a toy. His inner circle isn't just focused on training and recovery, it's built around long-term positioning, licensing conversations, media strategy, narrative alignment. Everything feeds into a bigger picture. Nothing feels impulsive, nothing feels accidental. And that alone separates this from nearly every rookie situation the league has ever seen. What really caught people off guard is that Cleveland didn't push back on that structure. They didn't try to dismantle it or absorb it into the franchise machine. Under Jimmy Haslam, they made room for it. They treated Sanders' operation as complementary, not competitive. That's a massive departure from how NFL teams usually behave, where any outside influence is viewed as a threat to control. Instead of saying, "This isn't how we do things," Cleveland asked, "How do we scale this without breaking it?" That mindset shift changed the entire relationship. Sanders isn't navigating the league blind or learning branding after the fact. He's executing a roadmap that already exists. Every interview feeds the brand. Every appearance reinforces positioning. Every moment builds equity. And because it's consistent and disciplined, it doesn't create friction. It creates confidence. That's the part most people miss. This isn't flash, it's infrastructure. For the league, this is unsettling because it exposes a gap they've ignored for years. They're used to athletes figuring this out mid-career, often after mistakes, controversies, or burnout. Sanders arrived fully formed in this area, and the Cleveland Browns didn't slow him down. They protected the vision instead of exploiting the moment, and that's why this model feels sustainable. It's not chasing virality, it's compounding value. This is no longer just about football operations. It's about ownership, realizing that the most valuable growth doesn't always come from playbooks and personnel moves. Sometimes it comes from letting the right person build alongside you instead of beneath you. Once this started working, the reaction around the league was immediate, but not public. There were no press releases, no official acknowledgments. What happened instead was a quiet scramble behind closed doors. Executives started asking unfamiliar questions. Agents began rewriting how they pitched young clients. Branding consultants suddenly found themselves on emergency calls with teams that had never cared about cultural relevance until now. Because if what was happening in Cleveland was real, then the rest of the league had a much bigger problem than a breakout quarterback. What unsettled everyone was how unprepared they were. Most franchises are built to manage talent, not empower it. They know how to contain a player, coach him, monetize him, and move on. They are not designed to collaborate with someone who arrives with vision and leverage. So when Shedeur Sanders began changing the financial and cultural math without causing disruption, it exposed how thin most teams' modern strategies really were. Suddenly, authentic content became the phrase of the month. Social media departments were told to make their quarterback feel human. Players were pushed into late-night filming sessions, awkward podcast appearances, forced TikToks, but none of it landed because you can't reverse engineer trust. You can't manufacture relevance, and you definitely can't copy a model without understanding why it works in the first place. That's where the real ripple effect showed up. It wasn't just about Cleveland winning the moment, it was about the gap widening. While teams were reacting, the Cleveland Browns were compounding. Every new market Sanders touched locked in fans the league couldn't easily reclaim. Every successful moment reinforced the idea that players didn't need to wait for permission anymore. And once that idea takes hold, it spreads fast. Now the National Football League finds itself in an unfamiliar position, not leading culture, but chasing it, trying to adapt without admitting the old model is cracking. Because if one franchise can shift the balance this much by sharing control instead of hoarding it, others are going to be forced to choose, evolve, or fall further behind. While owners and executives were busy debating strategy, the real audience paying attention was inside the locker rooms. Players noticed immediately, even if they didn't say it publicly. Veterans who had spent years being told to stay in their lane were watching a rookie step into the league with something they were never offered: respect beyond the stat line. Not hype, not favoritism, actual influence. And that changes how everything feels when you're wearing a helmet and pads every Sunday. For a lot of players, what Shedeur Sanders represents isn't confidence or charisma, it's possibility. He showed up with a voice and didn't have it stripped away. He spoke on his terms and wasn't punished for it. He built something alongside football instead of being told to wait until retirement to think beyond the game. That alone made people rethink what they'd accepted as just the way it is. What really stands out is that Sanders didn't get this by being reckless or defiant. He didn't fight the system. He outgrew it. And that's the part players are studying. Because if empowerment only comes through conflict, most athletes lose. But if it comes through alignment, clarity, and discipline, then the door quietly opens. Guys start asking why certain freedoms were never available to them, why their stories were filtered, why their value was capped at performance alone. Across the league, conversations are shifting. Younger players are more aware of leverage earlier. They're thinking about representation, narrative control, and long-term equity before their rookie deals expire. Not because someone told them to, but because they can see it working in real time. The idea that athletes can be business partners instead of replaceable pieces no longer sounds unrealistic. It sounds overdue. And that's what makes this moment so important. Once players stop seeing this as a one-of-one situation and start seeing it as a precedent, the balance of power doesn't snap, it slides, quietly, irreversibly. At this point, zooming in on Shedeur Sanders alone almost misses the point. He's not the headline anymore, he's the proof. What's actually unfolding here is a structural shift in how professional sports defines value, influence, and relevance. Sanders just happens to be the first modern quarterback to step fully into that space at the exact moment the league was most vulnerable to change. The future this moment points toward isn't louder players or chaotic branding. It's smarter athletes, more prepared ones, players who understand that performance is only one layer of impact, not the ceiling. In a world where attention moves faster than championships and culture crosses borders, instantly, the old formulas feel slow, linear, outdated. The next generation doesn't want to wait a decade to matter. They expect to participate now, to shape the story while they're still inside it. This isn't theoretical anymore. Younger fans are already telling the league what they care about, and it's not tradition alone. It's connection, identity, representation. They don't follow teams first. They follow people. They track journeys, voices, and values. And leagues that don't adapt to that reality don't just lose viewership, they lose relevance. Sanders didn't create that shift. He stepped into it early and proved it could be navigated without losing credibility on the field. That's why executives can't dismiss this as a one-off. The economics are changing. The media landscape is changing. Athlete awareness is changing. And once those three align, the system has to bend. Future rookies are going to arrive with advisors, strategies, and expectations that feel foreign to front offices still operating on control-first logic, not because they're entitled, but because they're informed. So when people say this is bigger than one player, they're right. This is about what comes next, about whether the league evolves with the people who power it or continues trying to restrain a generation that already knows its worth. Shedeur Sanders isn't the end result. He's the preview. When people look back on this moment, they'll probably frame it as a bold bet, a lucky break, or a perfect storm of timing and talent. But that undersells what actually happened. The real move wasn't drafting a quarterback. The real move was a decision about power. Jimmy Haslam didn't just identify talent, he challenged the assumption that control creates value. Instead of tightening the leash, he loosened it. Instead of centering the franchise on the front office, he shared the spotlight. And in doing that, he changed the trajectory of an entire organization. What makes this so consequential is that it didn't sacrifice football credibility to do it. Shedeur Sanders didn't become a brand at the expense of the game. He earned trust in the film room, in the weight room, on the field. The business side didn't replace performance, it amplified it. That's why this worked where so many other experiments fail. It wasn't hollow, it was aligned. Talent, preparation, and vision moving in the same direction. For the Cleveland Browns, this wasn't just a rebrand, it was a reset. A franchise long associated with instability became a case study in modern leverage. They didn't chase relevance, they let relevance grow organically through a player who understood culture better than any committee ever could. And now, whether the league wants to admit it or not, the blueprint is out there. Because the biggest takeaway isn't about one owner or one quarterback, it's about a truth the National Football League can't ignore anymore. In a new era of sports, value isn't something you lock down, it's something you co-create. Control isn't power, alignment is. And the moment Cleveland embraced that reality, everything changed.